particularly grateful to Professor Dr. Rashid Al-Yahyai. It's great of you, sir. Sultan Qaboos is a very well-known university, and she is particularly Muscat is known for not only producing dates, maybe I'm not sure how much they are producing, but they are marketing it well. So, moreover, Sultan Qaboos University is one of the leading institutions in the world. We have Professor Dr. Ikrar Ahmed Khan. I work with him. He has been working there, and Mumtaz is there in these days. Farouk has been there, and many more from Pakistan, and it has a collection of brilliant resources from all over the world, and we are very grateful, sir. You are one of the speakers today.
Thank you.
Ghulam Sarwar Market Saab is a well-known person on dates. He has a passion on dates, and particularly Kharpur is a belt, and we are looking forward that Palush also become a kind of member of that club, which has a passion on date palm promotion, production, propagation, bringing in diversity, marketing, and value chain. So, with these words, again, thank you very much and appreciate and looking forward to learn about these, very great resources, and the discussions generated through this forum would lead to basic and applied research for the improvement of dates. Thank you very much indeed.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you, worthy Vice Chancellor, for your welcome remarks. Just a brief introduction about today's presenters. Today we have Professor Dr. Rashid Al-Yahyai and Professor Dr. Sarwar Markand Sahab. So now I request to Professor Dr. Rashid Al-Yahyai to please start your presentation. And the topic of his today's talk is agroecology of date palm farms for sustainability and climate change mitigation. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I would like to thank you to give me this opportunity to talk to you, and I'm very delighted to be here with you, and I hope you will find this presentation useful. And also, I appreciate the help of Balusha. She has been not only a hard-working student, but also excellent communicator in arranging this workshop. So also my greatest thanks to Professor Dr. Asif Ali for the opportunity and organizing this meeting and wonderful word he talked about. Indeed, date palm is very important crop for all of our countries. And we will be talking about this crop, inshallah, today. And I hope we will all benefit. I will definitely benefit from the presence of Professor Sarwar. He's a great one of the leaders in the date palm, much better knowledgeable than myself, I mean. And but I happen to be in Oman, where the date palm is the top crop, basically, among all agricultural crops. So I also worked on both the business sector and the research sector to develop date palm and the industry of dates, which is we are still struggling, we're still lacking, but we hope we all bring this crop together to the world as a primary crop, inshallah. So I'm very delighted to start this presentation with the topic on agroecology. And the reason for me to highlight agroecology is I want to bridge the gap between the old practices of cultivating date palm, which our countries and our regions are famous for, and the modern and the new technologies that are now important and essential for the date palm sector and also the food sector in general. So the topic is agroecology of date palm farms for sustainability, and that is very important because that's a key element in agroecology and also for the long-term production of date palm, as well as the changes that are happening, the most of which bring us together Oman, Pakistan, and the rest of the world is climate change. And that has a great impact on all of the agricultural sectors, as we all know. And we need to learn how to mitigate the impact of climate change and adapt to it. So, this is basically the topic. I would like just to highlight that I am a professor at Sultan Qaboos University in the Department of Plant Sciences, but I'm also currently a visiting scholar at the University of Reading in the UK for this year. And so I am now stationed in the UK, although not far away from the date palm. Totally different crops, but still in the same region. Okay, so let's get into the topic. Agroecology. What is agroecology? It's one of those terms that are recent, actually, compared to other terminology like permaculture and traditional farming systems. Basically, it is now changing from a science. Ecology is a science. Agriculture is a science also. But it is moving toward a practice and how to use this science in practice in producing date palm in particular, but also it applies to other crops. It is even gone further and become a movement.
Recording
there
in
are certain
progress.
people who are driving forward the movement of agroecology in the world. And basically, what it, in simple term, it is the study of ecological processes applied to agricultural production systems. So we have a system of production. For example, date palm farms, we take the ecological principles and processes and apply those to those agricultural production systems. It also means the study, because it is a science, this particular science studies the interaction between all the elements, ecological elements, including plants, animals, humans, and the whole environment within those agricultural systems. So if we are talking about date palm, we talk about the involvement of the palm itself, other trees, other animals are involved, whether those animals are domesticated or wild, like birds or insects, humans as well, and the environment within those systems. Agroecologists study a variety of agroecosystems. There is a whole list of agroecosystems, but the primary one is natural resource management as an element for both the agricultural production as well as the ecological systems. And basically, this approach or this movement, or let's say practice, it's not only in one area or one field, and that's why it is very interesting. It is multidisciplinary and also interdisciplinary at the same time. So it involves more than one discipline, and that's why everybody should be familiar with it, or they can contribute to it, whether they are scientists working in molecular biology in the lab, or they are farmers in the field. All of them can contribute to agroecosystems. And those are summarized into 4 properties. One of them is productivity. That's the focus, of course, because ultimately we want to enhance productivity, as well as stability of the system itself, what has changed over time, especially in terms of biodiversity. Because what happened in the last few decades, there is an intense focus on productivity, but not much regard to the environment, which led eventually to the decline. So that is not sustainable way of practicing productivity. And that's why sustainability is an essential element of productivity in the agroecosystems. So maintaining diversity, productivity has to be sustainable in order for it to stay longer. We all strive to move from traditional farming practices to new kind of practices, but without considering the environment and the ecological systems. That is not going to sustain it. It will work for 1, 5, 10 years, 20 years. Eventually, it's going to collapse. And when it collapses, it will create a magnitude of issues and problems. As well as, finally, one of the final properties is equability of distribution or evenness within that is at any of the ecological elements, the plant, the humans, the animals, and so on. So that's basically it. But for you to understand what agroecology is, you have to have a full understanding of the natural sciences that include soil properties, for example, the interaction between plants and insects, whether that interaction is positive in terms of pollination, say, or it is negative in terms of pest infestation. Crop, what is crop and what is weed? That has to be defined, because what is a crop can be a weed, and vice versa. Interaction of plants and other animals, such as birds. Sociology, to understand the effect of farming practices on rural communities. What's the role of women in that community? What is the role of traditional labor? Can they be taught? Education is also involved here. Economic opportunities as well. What are the constraints to developing production methods that are cost effective, provide sufficient income to producers and farmers, as well as provide food security for the public, and of course the development of a market chain, and this is all important elements of agroecology. Finally, and not the least, is cultural aspects of these systems, and those are the factors that determine what practices to use, and those practices are very tightly connected to the culture of the one before it, which is sociology, because the different communities, even at in our own practices of date palm, for example, pruning, there are certain cultural mentalities and practices that will be very important in deciding what to do in terms of what kind of cultural practices to be applied to date palm, and that comes from not from science. It comes from a culture, traditional knowledge, informations that are inherited generations after generations. And the sources are this indigenous knowledge of the people who cultivate date palm or cultivate any other crop are also linked to their practices of those cultivation. We don't also forget religious influence, of course, because date palm is one of the precious religious plants mentioned in the Quran and Hadith, and not only in Islam but also in all other religions as well. So there is influence of religion on what to grow and how to grow it and how to deal with different plants. Obviously, also part of the culture, the use and the grown or cultivation of plant genetic resources as well, other plants associated with date palm in this case. So in our study of agroecology, we would like to develop sustainable, regenerative farming systems that improve the well-being of small-scale farmers, because the bulk in Oman, for example, more than 70% of all the farms are actually less than one faddan, and that is less than 4,200 square meters. Very small farms. Unless you have sustainable regenerative farm system that will improve the livelihood of those people, your system is not going to be sustainable. It's not going to meet your objectives. Create diversity to make food production resilient to a changing and predictable climate, especially nowadays. Resiliency has to rely on diversity. And we have experienced not only climate change, but even during the time of COVID, where there are lockdowns, where people have to rely on their own local resources, whether that is for food or it is for their own farming system, nutrition, and so on. Produce sufficient food while enhancing biodiversity. Now, this is the ultimate goal and objective of agro-biodiversity system, agroecological systems. Preservation of natural resources. This is the thing about modern agriculture. It has less regard to the natural resources. They assess natural resources as they are right now. So you go establish a 100,000 date palm farm, and then relying on the current status of natural resources without regard to how to preserve it for long term, how to make it sustainable. Without that, it is going to be lacking, despite the fact that you are having modern technologies in production, but without regard to natural resources, that's not going to be sustainable. Finally, ecological implication of modern agriculture. Modern agriculture that relies on technological advances is not going to be sustainable again unless it has ecological implications. Now let's focus on date palm. All of our countries are the top 10 countries. Here's I put 9 only just for the demonstration. Pakistan is one of the largest producer of dates and date palm, and you know better than me, of course. But it is large number constitute sixth largest producer of date palm, sometimes fifth in some instances in some years. Oman also eighth, ninth, 10th, it ranges. And this is from 2020, according to FAO statistics, it's the eighth largest producer. And they don't produce small quantities of dates. This amount of date should be more sufficient than needed to sustain economic development for small scale farms, if we have the proper post-harvest marketing channels, and we have the processing involved. It's just a wealth that is waiting to be used. But that wealth is subject to sustainability and long-term investment in the sector. If we look at over the last 10 years, and also forecasting the few 3 years up to 23, we could see that fluctuation, especially in Pakistan production. Pakistan date palm is the third crop, according to the information that I have. It's cultivated on 90,000 hectares of land. So that's not millions of people rely on it. More than half a million metric tons annually of dates are produced. That's not quite small. That's actually large amount of dates that are being produced. However, this fluctuation need to be addressed. Is it associated with what makes this fluctuation so drastic that it drops from almost 600 to close to 400? What's going on there? And overall, the picture, it seems, the trend in general, there is a decline. So that decline, either it is farm being abandoned, climatic issues, all of these concerns are there and they need to be addressed. On the other hand, in Oman, we have now improving. Also, there is fluctuation. You cannot deny there is, of course, that's normal for any crop. But those fluctuations generally give a positive trend of continued actually closing the gap between the production of Oman and Pakistan. I will not be surprised if one day Oman actually surprised and become one of the top 5 date producers, especially that the production is well planned, new farms, more production. The same area, by the way. Actually, the number of dates have declined, and in some cases, the area has declined, but the production has been enhanced because of producing or focusing on center cultivars that are very important in the market, and also the practices that are being used. So this is where sustainability makes a difference. This is where the economics, also implication of improving date production, makes a difference. And here in Oman, date palm, as I said, this is the top crop. It occupies 70%, more than 75% of the agricultural area of fruit production, basically, and more than 50% of all crops grown, whether that is forages, pastures, vegetables, whatever, field crops. More than 50% is date palm. More than 75% of all fruit produced are date palm. So date palm is essential in Oman, and there is close to 8 million date palms in the country. Of course, after that comes lime, banana, and mango, each one of them about 5%, and other crops are also there, but not commercially important. So we're going back to agroecosystems. Now we have looked at the date palm. So as far as farmers is concerned, local farmers, the large areas that are currently cultivated with date palm, which constitute again more than 50% of all the land in Oman. Basically, it is traditional in nature, right? It has lasted for thousands of years, and the same thing applies to also to Pakistan and many other countries. Wherever date palm is cultivated, it is not something new. It's not a new crop. It's been there for hundreds and thousands of years. So that is a testimony of the sustainability of dates. So there you go. You have traditional farming. You cannot criticize traditional farming for one thing at least. It is not sustainable. No, traditional farming is a sustainable production system that's been there for thousands of years. And there is a reason for its sustainability that we need to look at. And that's what we are doing here. Now, what about modern farming? Modern farming has led to issues, and we all know that. There is not a single modern farm that has sustained itself, whatever country, the US, UK, Australia, whatever it is, without depletion, destruction of natural resources, without creating issues with salinity of water, salinity of the soils, loss of biodiversity, ecological disturbance, food loss, migration of local growers and farmers. Eventually, per area, there was a decline in production. So the alternative was to create new farms, create new areas that will also be treated the same way, and eventually production is declining. So we are not saying there are total advantages in modern agricultural systems, and we are not saying that traditional systems are all old and they are useless. What we are saying, we need to create a balance learn from traditional farming and apply those principles to modern farming systems. And here is, for example, a picture shows how, and I don't think this is anyone who is dealing with date palm is very surprised that the farms are almost the same, the practices are almost the same, identical. And what's different now, when we modernize farming systems, we are introducing machinery to facilitate the labor, for example, spraying of chemicals that are being studied, not random, because we cannot control pests. We have a do-best bug that has been there for more than 40 years that we have not been able to control because we rely primarily on pesticides, and that will create its own issues. Now, with new technology, drones, we can do pollination with drones. We can do targeted spraying with drones. We can also check plant health with drones. So technology is essential and important, but it has to be applied within the agro ecosystems. And also here in both, not only in Oman, these are all pictures from Pakistan, and you do the same, just like we do. Boil the dates and grow intercrops just like we do. This is rice in this case, but we have also alfalfa, and we have wheat, and we have other kind of crops that are cultivated. We also solar dry a lot. Most of the dates are actually solar dry, just like this, exactly the same thing. And so introducing new technology like mechanical pollination, whether it is drones or not, will require re-education of the farmers. But that has to be within the traditional knowledge, because otherwise people will use it as long as you are there as an expert or a government official who is teaching them what to do. As soon as you leave or something happened to that equipment, it's no longer used. People will revert back to their traditional means knowledge, and that's where you have to integrate people's traditional indigenous knowledge to the technology that you are introducing in these systems. Other practices, the cost of energy, for example. People are talking about solar energy, renewable energy. How about no energy at all? Traditional farming systems have relied on agro ecosystems that rely also on no energy, the concept of zero energy. Forget about renewables and natural energy, it is just zero energy. And this is using science and knowledge. For example, for us in Oman, on the left picture, at the production stage, we bring water from springs in the mountain in canals called karas, and I'll show some of that also here, and irrigate the date palms and the farms without any pumping. As soon as we introduce pumping, we have lost groundwater, we introduce salinity by CO2 intrusion, and there's so many complications. So compare that to zero energy. And also in drying the dates, there is zero energy. It relies totally on solar energy, on natural system. You don't put anything. You don't need anything. You don't need even solar. Just put it there and it will dry. So now how to utilize zero energy in production systems? That is something that to work on from production all the way to post-harvest. And this is what I am talking about, carries or aflaj we call it, or canat irrigation systems. These are traditional, sustainable, has been there for as long as people can remember. The history goes back even to pharaohs and the Egyptians in the past. So these systems have been there forever. If they are not sustainable, they are not going to cultivate. Will not be able to cultivate crops in mountains. We are not going to be cultivating crops in deserts. But because these systems are very sustainable and utilizing zero energy, that's what made them sustainable, and that's what made us actually surviving until now in our own countries. And so here, the drawback, when you misuse the system, you end up with either floods, as you know, as a result, and this picture is also from Pakistan on the left, or drought and salinity like you see in Oman. And so overpumping of water has killed date palm in less than 20 years. And when you have a system that's been there for thousands of years and it's been destroyed in less than a few decades, there is an issue that needs to be taken into consideration. So water is very critical in this regard. Also, the same thing for the land. How in the past people have cultivated crops all over. They cultivated crops in the mountains, and you see here in the picture on the left, they cultivated crops in deserts. They cultivated crop in oases, whether that oasis mountain or desert or any land. Considering everything, the soil fertility, the soil structure, the soil texture, the topography of the land, all of it has been taken into consideration in indigenous farming systems. And we know these systems, we know this information until now. At least it is still available and preserved. So what makes it work? Why this has worked for thousands of years? Why this crop is very resilient and it is the most suitable crop for any future climate change. So that is very important. Another thing is combining all of these as a natural resource, because it's only examples. The land, the water, these are only examples. But actually, the agroecosystems rely on preservation of the natural resources, and that means you have to reduce biodiversity. We need to compare modern practices with traditional practices in terms of biodiversity, because if you lose biodiversity, it's not just a key word on people talk about it in conferences. It is a real thing. If you go to a farm that is biodiverse, you find it is lively. It has all the insects and all the animals, and you don't need to apply as much pesticides. You don't need to apply as much fertilizers, because you are rich, diversely rich. But once you lose that diversity, you start to compensate that with chemical or any artificial means of compensation that will not compensate it, and it's not going to be sustainable. So that's what we have there: integrated systems. We have pest and diseases. Pesticides use have only led to health issues, environmental issues, problems. Superbugs, like I mentioned, it like dubas in Oman. One of the major pests, loss of predators and bees, and a whole list of complications. So it's not just biodiversity is not just there as something that we are talking about, but also it is very essential. Climate change as well, which is an recent. It's not something recent. People have experienced climate change for a long time. Ask the farmers, ask the growers about the mountain and desert oases. What has changed over time? This is an example. For example, on the left in Oman, there's a mountain here with agro biodiversity. You can see the date palm integrated with grapes, other crops, even temperate crops. On the right here, also, I'm sure you have the same thing. You have date palm, you have fruit crops cultivated underneath it. There is diversity in the cultivar itself. In Oman, for example, we have more than 200 cultivars. This is important to preserve, even though we need to focus on medjool, for example, or what the market needs. But that is one thing. And preserving your local cultivars is very important as well, because that's what makes it sustainable. That's what makes the season long. It started in May and ends up in October. Why? Because of this diversity of cultivars. And Pakistan is also rich in diversity of date palm cultivar. We had a case study of Oman. We explored the traditional agriculture system as a case study. Here I present quickly. And 3 governorates. Compare that to a single farm that is modern. And we looked at different parameters. This is where we checked 3 different regions, and we see the rich diversity, and you can see it here in the pictures actually without having to do anything. But we surveyed all these different medicinal plants, aromatic plants, different fruit crops within farms, date palm farms, vegetables, field crops, and all of that. And so what we did is we actually look at all these variables in productivity or diversity of these traditional, because I think that is the key benefit of traditional agricultural system or agroecosystems, is the rich biodiversity in these farms. So this image in the high here and the upper, but you can see there's nothing in there. Compare that to the lower one. You can see the huge diversity. And of course, as expected, the monoculture date palm was not rich in any kind and demanding more fertilizers and more pesticides and more chemicals and maintenance in order for it to be actually productive and in the long term. Still, that is not sustainable, and it is suffering from soil and water salinity. Compare that to traditional systems. Also, we have here the diversity within each farm. The largest diversity, it's amazing the number of crops that are being cultivated in date palm farms. You have the citrus, all kinds of citrus. You have the grapefruit, and you have the lime, and you have all kinds of vegetables, eggplants, you have tomatoes, you have a whole onions, whatever, a whole list of crops that are cultivated in date palm. So people, when they calculate water requirements for date palm, they only focus on it as a single crop, but it's not a single crop. It is actually a full system that hosts all other systems, including animals and birds, and of course, all these other systems that are there. And you can see here the huge diversity. And SQU is where the modern farm is. That's where the university is. But also, even in Muscat, the capital of Oman, Batina, Dakhliya, and all these regions, there is a richness. There's a high diversity compared to the monoculture of date palm, and this is applicable to both plantations. It means all components of diversity in farms, as well as cultivar even. There in modern farms, you will find only single cultivar or two cultivars at the most. In traditional system, you can never find less than 15 cultivars in the same farm, because the objective is not just to have one big large fruit that will be exported or sold in the market. It is a food system for the locals as well. So it is very essential to have those cultivars and maintain them. So the idea is to maintain those systems in place. So we found out, as we expected, of course, that modern farms are extremely low in biodiversity. The availability of produce from a variety of other crops also has declined because of the decline in biodiversity. That is very important to look at and to link the two. The two. You cannot just individually look at each one alone. So when you talk about irrigation of date palm, for example, in this case, just like we had rice there, we had forage crops here. You look at the whole system. How much is water per all of the agro-ecosystem, not just for date palm, which will give you fruits only for a certain number of months. That's not the way to go when you talk about agro-ecosystem in traditional farming systems. Also, this system is sustainable, as I already mentioned, resilient. That means, and having multiple cultivars is a key part of that. Biodiversity is key. It cannot be resilient if it is not biodiverse, and also applicable to modern cultural practices or in the agroecosystems. Finally, as a conclusion remarks, improving current practices of cultivation to enhance yield and quality should consider agroecosystems, overall impact on the date palm plantation, ecological benefits of existing practices. That includes what happens if we change. What can we learn from it? Do we lose wildlife habitat? Because date palm is a rich wildlife habitat. Do we lose pollinators like honeybees? Therefore, we are influencing other crops too. Other fruit trees, other vegetables will be influenced because you are losing your honeybees. Loss of medicinal and traditional non-crop plants. This is very essential. All these date palm farms, I'm sure everywhere, and also farms in general, that are traditional in nature would have a lot and rich medicinal and traditional plants other than the main crop. And that's not always weed, that's actually used in medicinal and aromatic practices. And so then that needs to be looked at. Further, that supplement farmer income as well if you go for a monoculture that is natural, and then you lose year-round food availability, because that's the whole objective of traditional farm biodiversity, is to ensure that we have supplies of food. If not this cultivar, then this cultivar, and if early in the season and also late in the season, as dates, as dried dates, as boiled dates, all of this in these systems. So agroecology for sustainable date palm production and climate change mitigation has to consider sustainable agroecosystem, look at indigenous knowledge, and each country has its own. I'm sure Pakistani growers of date palm have rich indigenous knowledge that we can use in Oman, and you also can benefit from the information that we have. Preserving biodiversity, low or no chemical input, low or no energy as well, integrated farming, and technological advances. And that is your role. How do we apply technological advances, whether we are talking about molecular biology, we are talking about tissue culture, we are talking about whatever technology you are talking about, drones even, artificial intelligence. How can we benefit the agroecosystems with these technologies? Because what's happening now, we are trying to study like very small, minor point in any in plants. For example, looking at the salinity tolerance gene, without referring back to the system that actually has better solutions, maybe, or better use of those information. So that link has to exist between people who are practicing agriculture in the field and also those people who are in the lab developing new technologies. So that connection has to be there, and that can be done only by community engagement that includes everyone, from the growers or the farmers to consumers, researchers, students, agribusiness, government, civil, you name it. Everyone has to be involved. Without community engagement, it's not going to happen. And obviously, this meeting of us, you, and thank you for inviting me and organizing this meeting, is one of those community engagement, because all of us from different disciplines, agro ecosystems are inclusive, include everyone, influence everyone. Everyone can contribute to it. The question is, how do you contribute as individual to this system to make it more sustainable, make it more resilient to climate change? And with that, I conclude my presentation. I'm sorry I may have taken some more time than I should. I appreciate your listening, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rashid, for sharing a very informative presentation with us. As climate change is a big issue in Pakistan and all over the world, and date palm is a very important crop to cope this situation. And thank you so much, Dr. Rashid. And now I would like to invite